the words that I speak.
We're going, baby.
Just like that.
I don't know if it
We're in.
matters.
Gentlemen, cheers.
Cheers.
Hey,
Cheers.
cheers. This is yeah.
The first podcast of many
Many to come. All right.
No kidding.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah, so we don't even know what we're gonna talk about.
This is fine.
We're just
It's
literally
fine.
coming on this thing, just and we got this Halloween thing going on behind
love
us.
the theme.
The vibe, yes.
Because
we do.
Halloween is it's like
It's
next
in like
week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks from
2
now.
weeks.
Yeah.
Almost exactly. Yeah.
This is
Did you
great.
guys ever trick or treat
Of course.
when you
Yeah.
were kids?
You
Yeah.
say, of course. My family, you probably know
sorry.
that. Yeah, no, like we grew up like the super conservative Christian, but the homeschool,
Yeah.
almost
Yep.
cult-like version. I found out recently, I don't know if you know this, we were actually a part of a cult.
Wait, what?
Congratulations.
I know, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
kind of jealous.
Yeah,
honestly.
I want to know what you're
To
talking
be
about.
honest, Abe,
I've
so
never
I
been
think
in
I'm
a cult.
definitely gonna need another pour whiskey. For
I
this.
would.
Maybe I should join. Like, is it hard to join? I don't know.
Which is funny because as a kid, one of my big dreams in life was
Be in a cult?
to be a cult leader.
To be a cult leader.
And I'm not even kidding.
Love that about
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
It's like Jared Leto from 30 Seconds to Mars.
Oh, literally though.
So
So
my father always said, if you want to be a millionaire, start your own religion.
Wow,
oh, I will drink to that, sir.
that's something. That's something.
So, what do you
maybe I
guys
should think
think?
about it. I don't know.
Actually, on that note, what do you guys think of this? I've always thought over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been contemplating this, and if I was 100% all about the money, I would do this. I would start my own religion, just like you said, but it would be a religion for the Christians who left the church. It's like a scientific Christianity. Yeah. So yeah, people like Dr. Joe Dispenza would be like a big spearhead in that world, where you're introducing like neuroscience as well as psychology and spirituality, religion, all have this really cool interplay.
That is interesting.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Matt's in.
What do I sign?
First, you have to leave Christianity.
Well, I don't want to leave Christianity, but
I'm sticking with Christianity, but that is a very enticing religion you got going on there.
Wouldn't it be interesting?
what would you call it? Like something simple, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're the leader.
I was going to say,
you're the
thank
leader.
you. Thank
I'm
you.
so sorry.
In your place. That's right. I was thinking some punishment later.
Yeah, okay.
Something like just scientific spirituality or something like that. Just something very simple.
Gabriality.
I don't want people to think it's all about me. I mean, it can be, but they don't have to. I don't want people to know
Well,
that.
I mean, Christianity is Christ.
Okay, touche.
Christ.
Touche.
I'm thinking. Like, I'm really into this now.
Yeah, I know.
So-
See, Matt's already working out the theology.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
just
like,
trying to
I
figure that whole
love
thing.
it.
Yeah.
This
Oh.
is, he's having the Gabeisms
Yeah.
of the.
I'll put that on the back
Yeah.
burner for him.
Yeah.
Because he's the leader. That's not my job.
So it's interesting because trick. So this is. I kind of want to talk about Halloween for a second.
Let's do
'cause
it.
We're pretty close.
Let's go into it.
So, I grew up from a conservative background,
Mm-hmm.
Christianity. But we're Christians. There's so many different backgrounds with Christianity, but it was definitely a conservative background where
Mm-hmm.
the whole concept of death was frowned upon in the Christian circle. You know what I mean? So like you couldn't
Like,
dress
no,
up.
I don't.
Well,
Can you-
okay, let me get into it. So like,
No, I really don't.
so I
Yeah,
so
I
I
love
came
this.
from like so when I grew up as a kid, and this wasn't necessarily with my parents. I mean, my parents definitely were a part of this too, but like we weren't allowed to become zombies and even as simple as skeletons. Like
Oh, I
like,
see. I
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
It's just representing this whole concept of death.
Totally.
And by the way, I've completely shifted my thinking on that. Like, for instance, my 2 daughters and my wife and I, we're all going to be a bunch of skeletons for this Halloween.
Love it.
Just because, I mean, why not? Who cares? It's just skeletons. But interesting enough, I've ran into people and told them that from a conservative background, and they've given me that sour face, like, why are you celebrating death? And it's like, I'm not really celebrating death. We're honestly just having fun. That's all we're doing.
Right.
And by the way, we all have skeletons in our bodies, so I don't understand why it has to be taken to such a deep negative level, So what about you
Celebrating
guys,
death.
like Halloween and all that?
So celebrating death. Do you know what they meant by that?
I mean, I think that, doesn't that originate from like a southern, like you have people from like Mexico celebrating the dead.
Oh,
you know.
okay.
Now that's not where they're coming from. They're coming from evil. I mean, they're taking this whole concept
Yeah,
of
I
celebrating
think
death
that's-
to an
yeah,
evil
right.
level. But then you got people in the southern parts where they're celebrating their lost ones,
Right,
in the
right.
afterlife, and that's a whole nother
Well,
theology.
and that's a very interesting point because just different cultures are looking at death in a very different way.
Right.
And sometimes you're part of communities that like are very rigid in their interpretations, and like you have to go to Halloween dressed as an angel. And, like that's not
I'm
so fun.
serious.
Literally
Like,
growing up that
best
What
way.
are
I was-
you? I'm John the Baptist.
The best thing I was able to be was Jar Jar
tell me
Binks
that's
from
true.
Star Wars. I was able to be Jar Jar Binks from Star Wars, and that was
Sorry.
the best I could be as far as
sorry.
monsters go.
Oh, dude,
Like,
I'm so
you know,
sorry.
that's it. You know.
I'm
But
sorry.
yeah, so what do you guys think? I mean, where did you guys get to dress up?
Oh yeah, we did. My parents were just like completely cool, open about the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes they knew it was the night to dress up, and like my dad was a man of reading and literature, and so he saw through metaphor. So if somebody wanted to be like a pirate or like a ghost or demon, he would have been like, just make sure it's good, like have the best demon costume.
Quality.
you
I
can.
love it.
It's got to be
I
quality.
like your dad. Yeah.
And so then it was just like totally open and free because he looked at all the different angles, right? It wasn't just like a rigid interpretation, like, oh, if I dressed up like a demon, I was going to get possessed.
Yeah, where did that narrative come from, you think?
Fear, just fear. I think it's just a sense of fear.
Yeah, it's just so interesting. I mean, what about you?
Like we grew up very like you're not allowed to do anything. It got so extreme. Like I watched Harry Potter, not even Halloween, right? Like just the idea of anything that wasn't within the Christian narrative.
Yeah.
I watched Harry Potter, and this is when I was like 18.
Wow.
Went to the latest one that came out and went to the drive-in. Came back, and my parents said, if you want to stay living at this house, you can never do that again.
Wow.
It was intense. They've obviously they're not that way anymore, but so that was one example of like everything had to fit this understanding that they had at the time. And I think you kind of hit it on the head when we were talking about how it was so rigid. People have this rigid understanding, and if this is how I think about something in the moment, then that's the way it is. Versus trying to look at it and say, okay, cool. Some people view this as like death as this terrible thing that you absolutely hate, and other people celebrate it. And being
But
able to
it's
look
being
at it different ways.
celebrated though, nonetheless. I mean,
Yeah.
take a look at Netflix right now. #1 movie or #1 show, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Right.
We're celebrating serial killers, and maybe that's a harsh way to put it, celebrating serial killers. But in some senses, it's kind of people are really interested in death, like
Well,
death.
I think right, like it's now think about it. Just think about it. Like of all the like beings on this planet, like who has the ability to like conceptualize their own death? Like the squirrels aren't really like, oh, I'm going to die tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like we have, it's a very unique thing that we have the ability to conceptualize and to like think about our potential non-existence.
Yeah,
And so it would make sense to me to like almost fixate on that because, the brain is always attenuated to biggest threats and biggest opportunities. And so one of my earliest experiences that I remember was actually going to a funeral. I was with my grandfather, and he was a minister and a pastor. And I remember I was very young, and it was like a distant relative. And so he brought us up there to the coffin. And so I was so little, and he was describing the Christian view of death. But I'm looking at this dead body. I was very young. It was too young to see a dead
yeah,
body.
open casket.
And it was an old lady, and all I could see was like, think in my head, this is a game. Like she's going to breathe. Like, ooh,
come
somebody's gonna pop out. We got you, Matt.
Yeah.
And I just remember looking at her nose, and he's talking. It's like Charlie Brown's teacher. So I'm just like, I just remember being that kind of changed my life, to be honest with you, because I was like, when I left that day, I was like, we're all gonna die. And so, I mean, to your point, like I think.
So it was a profound day for you.
It's life changing, but it's
Yeah.
also like, and I know people who are fixated on death, or I know people who like push it down, they suppress it.
Why? Like,
Well, I just think it's a fear. It's such a fear, and I don't think
yeah. I'm scared of it. I'll be honest. Like,
in
it
the
scares the
sense
crap
it's
out of me.
like it's. I'm not sure there would be a religion if we were eternal. I don't think there would be a religion. I think death is just a game changer, and it makes us have to it makes the human species have to really
That
think.
is an interesting thought.
Yeah, I don't think there would be a religion.
Like, how many religions have been created just based on the concept of death alone?
Can you expand upon that? Because my mind takes that in multiple different ways.
Yeah.
Which way are you referring to?
In what respect?
So, okay, when you say I don't think there would be a religion if if we were eternal beings. My way, or my brain says, one is that, okay, is that saying that religion, the primary motivation of religion is this fear of death, or is it something else that you're saying?
Well, I think that's a good point. I think the thing is, like, I think it's theoretically possible to be an eternal being and still have a spirituality, right? Like if you look at the beginning narrative of the Bible, like there's no death on the scene. God's there, and Adam and Eve are there. There's a creation there. So there's this concept of a spirituality. And in the Christian concept, you have the fall and what's introduced. So you have this introduction of the serpent, right? So this first introduction to chaos comes on the scene of this serpent, right? And this like this malevolence and this this thing that has the ability to deceive, the ultimate form of chaos, right? And so using the fruit or whatever, and then it's like death is introduced by the third chapter. And so if from then on, the whole story is about who can fix this problem.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if we kind of like, I think death forces us to think about why we're here. Death makes us think about our life. It makes us think about God. Makes us think about things that we wouldn't normally think about. Maybe that's maybe a better way to say that.
So there's a lot of things. I feel like a lot of families, at least back in our parents' generation, maybe in your maybe within your parents' generation as well, where death was suppressed so badly that I almost feel like it was harmful, because it created because death. There's so many different manifestations of how death can be talked about, I suppose, but just like the narrative of death in general for me in my family has always been something we just don't really talk about, And it's weird to think about. I'm just thinking about this now for the first time.
Well, my grandfather,
we never talked about it.
well, he grew up in an obviously different generation. So
Yeah.
He was in the hospital for 7 years with tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Think about 7 years.
Wow.
From
Yeah.
like 20
That's
to 27.
your life.
And
And
so
especially at that age.
Yeah, you're dealing with death on the regular. Friends are dying, people are dying.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're going to die. So I agree that generation was death was this kind of like shadow friend. It loomed over everything. And here we are in this house, right?
Right.
There have probably been 20 people who have died in this house.
Oh, you literally have a graveyard.
It's a graveyard up
Yeah.
back. And one winter, the
crazy.
guy who originally lived here, he lost 2 daughters that were under 5, I believe, in one winter.
I can't imagine.
And think about it. Let's get dark for a second.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
It was in February. What do you do with a body in February?
Yeah.
Right? You can't put it outside because something will eat it. So what do you do with it? Put it in the basement? Like what? There's no, right?
It's awful.
And then it's
Wow.
it's awful. So
Especially if they're your daughters.
can you imagine? So when you talk about that generation, death was in their face. Like it was like if you
It really was.
If you suppress it, you're delusional, right? And so
Yeah.
my grandfather was like, "Hey guys, and he was like, let's go see a dead body. He was gonna preach a funeral. So for him, it was like, these kids need to know that they're gonna die. Like that was part of the deal, because he knew it was a moment of like, it's a critical moment in your consciousness when you know I'm gonna die.
Yeah.
So he was like, yeah, it's time for you guys to learn a lesson, not in a malevolent way, but just
Yeah.
like, because you couldn't.
Jeez.
So
Do you think that benefited you learning that at such a young age?
That's a great question, dude. I would say looking back in my older years, probably, but it was probably too young. But millions and millions of people had to face death young.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't change it. If I could go back now, I wouldn't change it because one of my favorite sayings even to this day is memento mori. Remember your death or you're going to die.
Yeah.
It's helped me out so much in so many different ways I can't explain, but like, so no, I wouldn't change that experience at all, but I think it did kind of rattle in my head for a bit. And I remember once talking to this girl in high school, and she was talking to me about something. I don't know what it was. And I laughed. It was something she thought was serious. I laughed. She was, what are you laughing about? And I said, do you realize we're all going to die? And she was just like, I've never thought of that. So I had this ability to perspectivize context and situations because I knew we were going to die.
Yeah.
And it gave me a certain sense of levity or even humor in the face of the outrageous.
Yeah.
So it helped me perspectivize. I don't know if that's a word, but like help me to put things in perspective.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't change the experience, but it did affect me.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is fascinating.
it did affect me.
Death.
Yeah, so like my dad was into literature and he grew up in that environment. So I think he wasn't afraid to let us stress his demons and because after death, all literature, all art, everything's done under that context, right?
Right. Well, and that's the
So-
thing. Like artists don't necessarily see it in a worshipful sense or in a sense of like, oh, we're gonna praise this or celebrate this. It's like we're just artists. We're just like, I mean, dude, you're writing a phenomenal book
I
right
don't know if it's phenomenal.
now. Phenomenal
writing.
book. Oh, it's phenomenal. I mean, it literally is
biggest
about a
fan. I'll
vampire.
give you $10.
No, it's
I love it.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
Oh,
but,
of course you are.
But it's about a vampire, and this is not like a Twilight. Like he's read some of this to me, and I'm just mesmerized after the first sentence. Mesmerized.
Oh, thank you, guy. It means
And
a lot.
it's just, it's like, it's in a very deep and profound book about a vampire, and there's a lot of death regarding that stuff, and I don't think that that's wrong. Like, from a Christian's perspective, because I know that there's a lot of people that are going to be in religious groups that are going to listen to this podcast. Like, we're not sitting here trying to like praise Satan. It's not
Right.
about that. It's not about, oh yeah, the devil, let's do it. Like it's much more profound and artistic, I think, is really what we care about here. So I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Well,
Take it away, Matt.
no, just
like, I'm
because
sure you have a
I'm
lot on
writing.
here.
Well, I just writing about it. Like,
Yeah.
one of the themes that is not only the book but it's in life is the sense of, and if we get into men's mental health, this is a big deal. But like,
Oh yeah, this is all going to come full circle.
well, is trauma.
Oh
Right,
wow,
come on.
yeah.
So
Speaking
when
my
I'm
language.
when I'm a little boy, probably 5 years old, and I'm seeing some distant relative, I think there's a game because she's going to breathe.
Yeah.
I'm sitting there, she's not breathing,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's that impacts the brain. That is a traumatic experience on some level
Yeah.
because it leaves an imprint on the brain, and to this day I can remember being there, the smells, this
Yeah.
I can think back on the memory without feeling like I don't feel the sympathetic nervous system kick on. So I think horror, why I've selected this genre, to me is the most authentic genre there is. Because it deals with death, and it deals with the dark side of human experience. Because it deals with trauma. And we're all going to be traumatized on some level. It's unavoidable. And to kind of piggyback on some of the Christian themes, I was talking to a good friend about this the other day. We're talking about Protestantism, Catholicism, and Anglicanism, and I was like talking about, and she was talking about the architecture. And I'm thinking about the Catholic architecture, and churches picked this up in like the medieval period too. It was like you had like gargoyles, you had demons on churches.
That's right.
So imagine
Interesting.
you're in
Yeah.
a field, like you. So medieval period, like you're just I don't know what you do. You're picking corn. I don't know what you do in medieval. You're like shoveling
Yeah.
with a wooden shovel, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And in your village, there's a giant church, and the church has got gargoyles and demons. It's black. Those churches are black, like literally, whatever copper they used, right? And they were black, and they were very Gothic buildings. And then when you went in, they were Gothic, and the way those were designed, usually the shape of the cross. That was meant to convey something to that mind. And I always, when I was a kid, despised Christianity because it was always, like, for example, the colors were always pastel. And I hated it because I especially at that young age, I had seen a woman, this woman that I was talking about, my grandfather, she died, right? And I was traumatized. Then I'd go to church. Everything was so happy.
Yeah.
And things I used to, back in the 80s,
went
everything was pastel. Easter was pastel. I hated pastel.
Yeah, it felt
If
not
it was
as
now-
authentic anymore.
If I went to a church where there was a demon and a gargoyle and spires, and I would have been like, oh, I'm home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it would have related to the existential crisis and trauma that we're going to die.
Yeah.
And so I think horror picks up that theme.
Can I run with this? This is a question that I've had and I've actually never asked it in any conversation I've had, which says a lot if you know me. How do you think that has affected the present generation? So let me explain what I mean. Like you're saying, past generations, they seem to embrace death, like we were talking about, because that's something that was in their face. It's something that you had to face, and you were a fool if you didn't.
You were delusional.
You were delusional. That was the word. Yeah. Now, present, we're talking this last generation, my generation to present, it has been this whole like positive psychology, which I am a huge believer in, but taken to the extreme where it's this shut off, shut down, push any negative thing away. And you see it in Christianity, you see it in pop culture, you see it in self-care, even to the extent that you see it in self-care. How do you think that, as from the outside, how do you think that has affected and changed this generation versus others?
Wow, that's a good question. I'm not qualified to say, but I would. My knee-jerk reaction is, if you love somebody, you tell them the truth, and
Come on.
and if you don't help people deal with a core wound or root trauma, and tell them to go out in life, like be a good boy, be a good girl, don't do this, don't do that, and you set them afloat, right? And you tell them, let's pick up that metaphor. You push them out in the lake or in the water. You say, there's nothing in this water. Just go and do what you'd be a good girl, could be a good boy. But you don't tell them there are serpents and dragons and Leviathan in that water. And if they're out there, it's a beautiful day, maybe they're fishing in that boat, and they see a Leviathan, they see a serpent, it's a trauma.
Yeah.
So I think by not telling somebody the truth about death, then you're leaving this kind of existential trauma. We're saying, shh, just pushing it aside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it still is going to operate.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Which
I
in and
think-
of itself creates trauma, more trauma.
Yeah. And it's going to present, I know so many people who are younger who are just like terrified by the concept, and they should be terrified by the concept of death.
Yeah.
So I think I go back to Gothic Christianity. I think that's the most authentic expression of the existential crisis. The architecture, everything. I mean, I still struggle today. Like I go into church today. I mean, it's all great, but it's all just so feels superficial. I know it's not. People are good people. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I would feel at home if I was going to church and I looked up, it was a cloudy day and I saw a demon peering down at me. Because I'd be like, this makes sense. I feel that.
Well, it's because people are suppressing their trauma. Like they don't,
maybe.
and it's for the main point of shame that people don't want to. There's vulnerability and shame to these traumas that people have experienced. I mean, it could be anything from, not wanting to admit that your parent might have been like emotionally abusive to you, down to being sexually abused or being, or just being anything that just sounds really negative. And it's really interesting because not even just Christians. I mean, we're talking Christians in church. Like this is like a problem in culture, period.
Yeah.
Like people don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And if they don't want to talk about it like this, maybe they'll talk about it on social media where it's a mess,
Right.
because, but that's not really talking about it. But you can see, honestly, I feel like the truth comes out on social media, to be completely honest. You want to see the ugliness of trauma, just go read a bunch of people's comments on social media. You'll see it come out because, you know what I'm saying?
Dude,
but when I
or
go to
even-
family gatherings or if I go to dinners or if I go to like hanging out with, it's always all positivity. Everything's got to be positive. We can't talk about that negative bullshit. Like we can't do that. Like, and that's,
Yeah. And I think it's you brought up a couple of really good points there, but I think people will heal more if they deal with the internal traumas and the external traumas. You're more apt to laugh. You're more apt to relax if you have a resolution for the trauma. Like if there's a snake in this room, I hate snakes. If there's a snake right over in that corner, I'm going to be fixated on the snake.
Yeah.
I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to start sweating. I'm like, I'm not a fan. But if somebody tells me I've got a special snake net, right? All you have to do, Matt, or a snake gun, all you just point it and the snake's going to be eliminated. I'm going to relax.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm going to have a better time.
Snake gun.
Right? Because I have a solution
Yeah.
for that threat.
Yeah.
So if I don't have a solution, that snake is traumatic.
So this is
Insofar, so if that snake's in here for a day, it's not good. If that snake's in there for a week, even worse. If that snake's in here
but
for
this
a
is
year,
the problem with
then you're fixated.
Right.
But if you have a way to deal with that snake, your nervous system has resolution.
Right.
So
Just
so
that
the,
we haven't been taught a way to deal with that.
so the same thing. If the snake is then death, and you're sitting in the room and you're like trying to suppress, this is over there, this is over there. Everything's fun. You're on social media.
Yeah.
But as soon as you hit your pillow at night, there's a snake in my room. You know,
right
something.
and you know, this is something that I think the three of us all care deeply about, which is specifically mental health in general, but I think specifically men's mental health, not to sound chauvinistic here or, you know, like super masculine, you know, it's like not about that. It's just about, I do think that men suppress their trauma much more than women. I don't have a proof on statistics with that. I actually would like to figure that one out. I think it's
true. I've
legit.
looked it up. It's wild.
Right.
To go just.
But we
personal.
live with the snakes in our houses all day long, like, you know, and we just live with them.
Yeah.
And we don't go out and figure out where our snake gun is. You know, I'm going off this metaphor.
No,
you know,
exactly,
like,
yeah.
and ultimately, it's like, so how do we do that? You know, how do we encourage men to actually, because that's going to make a man a better man,
Yeah.
a much better, a greater man. He'll be a great man, being able to eliminate all these fears and traumas that he's had to deal with.
Yeah, well,
his whole life.
and the essence of not to get too religious here, because I'm not trying to. Just had a conversation today about masculinity, and like somebody was asking me, we're talking about masculinity, and I was like, my model of I said I haven't seen a model of masculinity yet better than the life of Christ, and it's like, well, what did what did Christ do? And if you go back in the Old Testament, the first they call this a proto-evangelicon or something, the first announcement of the gospel. There's this promise to Adam and Eve that there's somebody coming who will crush the head of the serpent. Right from the beginning. There's somebody who's going to kill chaos. And that person becomes Christ, right? He's the person that starts to take the chaotic realities and then manage them, make them better, marginalize them, make chaos less and less operative. So, I mean, that's trauma. So if you have men who are taught to suppress the trauma, that you're less of a man for facing it, you're less of a person for this, then you're being pulled further away to being able to be a snake killer in your own life. And then the snakes don't go away. And then eventually you're just like, you know, if you're a man and you start feeling anxiety, if you're a man, you start feeling depression. And then what do? Right? Like you suppress it. And if you put that on a probability stream, right? Okay, I'm suppressing anxiety, I'm suppressing it. Put that on a clock. How long?
How long?
Right.
It's just a matter of time.
Right. And then you can say, okay, I'm going to get help. And then you got people are going to make fun of you, or you're going to, you know, so, you know, men have their own, I think men have a very unique trauma set they have to deal with in cultures. Women do too. But I think men have especially when it comes to mental health, they have to overcome trauma to get it fixed for trauma, right? So,
Right,
so
and
if I'm a man and I want to go to a psychiatrist, I'm going to deal with the trauma of all my friends saying, you're gay,
Yeah. Yeah.
for getting help. So you have to face a core trauma to get help, to face your trauma. So it's at least a twofold process to getting help.
That explains my own personal experience. So I don't know if you know, I know Cody knows this, and I was sexually abused for like almost a decade as a kid.
Wow, I'm sorry that I didn't know. I'm very sorry.
How do I say this? It is something that I would never wish someone would go through, but I wouldn't change.
I'm sorry, dude.
I would never change what happened because I've been able to walk to this day. I can count 5 people through their own sexual abuse. Like while it was happening, I've walked more people than I can remember off the ledge of suicide because I was there. Like I attempted suicide. Like it had gotten so bad, and Cody was right there, like friends with me through this process. And like, what I can say is, as I started the last couple of years, I started to share this. I started to talk about it. Like a guy who was in a touring band for years, who now is like quote unquote financially successful, who has this everything together, quote unquote, on the outside, is now talking about how he was sexually abused for a decade as a kid, grew up in a cult. I make fun of it, but it's true. Socially isolated. Like it got so bad, I developed multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder. Like it was really intense, attempted suicide. As I started talking about this and sharing about this, literally a couple months, like I had so many guys come out of the woodworks that I've known for years that have been like, hey, I never told anyone this, but yeah, like, thank you for sharing. That's helped me. I actually went through a similar thing. Wow. So many, I had talking to a stranger about this in the sauna a couple months ago. Literally we just started talking about deep shit and got onto like, yeah, you know, I had this abuse and like this all happened and this is the mental disorder I have, but it's actually kind of cool because it works. And he's like, dude, he's like, I've actually went through a similar thing. He's like, I've never told anyone this. This is so common and no guy is talking about it, or very, very few. And I think you're right. Like there is that like double level trauma. Facing it is that first one. And before you even get to actually dealing with it, it's just accepting that help.
Wow. Well, first of all, my heart goes out to you. I'm very, very, very sorry, but I know you, and I'm also proud to know you, what you've overcome. That's incredible. That's amazing, my friend. It's incredible.
So I've been kind of like browsing through some of these different things on trauma and whatnot, and PTSD. We would say that would tie into what we're talking about here, right? Mm-hmm. What I keep finding here is, and this is on multiple websites, is that it's more prominently in women than it is in men. So there's been multiple studies on it. This is the NIAI, or this is actually the National Center of PTSD. It says that around 10% of women have PTSD, whereas compared to men, there's only 4%. And so there's multiple websites and researches that have done that. So why do you think that is? Like, why do you guys think women
I think men don't talk about it.
That's what I was.
Yeah, men don't. But that's the thing, though. It's like if you would think that if you don't talk about it, you would develop PTSD more. Yet we have a lower PTSD than women.
Well, we also have a higher suicide rate, right?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So probably people aren't
back to death.
Well, it goes to that double trauma. And I think there's more than just a double trauma. Probably there's probably like they're complex traumas for getting help. And I think for a man, like, it shows you how men are wired on some level. But it's like to get help is so traumatic. I'd rather die.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so what I think is real masculinity, in my perspective, is the ability to subvert roles and say, I'm getting help. Mm-hmm. Like, then you're somebody going against the crowd. Mm-hmm. You're going against the grain, and that's what.
And most men don't usually do that.
Well, and it's like because it takes so much. I had
like Gabe, you did this.
Yeah,
you reached out for help.
It takes a lot.
Yeah. It takes a lot, especially for something like that, because there's probably shame that comes with that. You know, even though you're a victim in the circumstance, there's still shame.
So
like that's such a shameful thing to like. Yeah. I can only imagine that feeling. You know.
Yeah, that was one of the hardest things to come over, or to come through.
Yeah.
So how did you do that? Like, how did you come through that? How did you? Because most men are not doing this, right?
I don't.
We're not reaching out for help.
Yeah.
No, it's
like
true.
we got to. If we got it, like counseling. I feel like this is another problem too, because I do want you guys to answer that question. Like, how do we do that? But I seriously think one of the problems with the elder generations are that counseling was almost like frowned upon, or only used when it was a catastrophe, like an absolute catastrophe.
And if you used it, you were crazy.
Yeah,
like
you're
you were
crazy.
kind of labeled.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So how did how did you get yourself to that point where you're like, I need help? You know, I'm a victim, but I need help.
I had attempted suicide. That's how I got to that point.
Right.
They talk about, even to this day, like if you want to talk about how to change a behavior, how to change a pattern, how to change a habit, you'll know all about this. You have to have the first step, or one of the earlier steps rather, in order to make it stick, you have to have enough leverage. If you don't have enough leverage, it won't last. And so for me, what that looked like was bottling everything up, for years, not telling a soul, taking on all of my personal trauma, the friends that would come to me because I was super empathetic, and taking on all of their abuse and all of their trauma. I was like 10 or 12 years old. I'd be walking through Shaw's. Stranger would come up to me and start telling me about their divorce. Wow. Like I would take, and didn't know how to externalize that. So I just internalized all of it. Years of doing this brought me to a point where I said, I am done. I'm done. And it was about 15 years old. I decided I was going to commit suicide. Planned the time, planned the place, got there, and went into my room, locked the door, and I turned on the radio because I didn't want anyone to hear. My family was still there. And it was this song that came on. This was, you guys were Christians, so you guys would know this. Switchfoot, Meant to Live.
Oh yeah, great song.
With the chorus, you were meant to live for so much more. And I instantly just started breaking down. The very next song was this one by Chris Tomlin, who's this Christian worship artist. And it was the Made to Worship. And thank you. The whole, what I instantly knew at the core of my being was I was made to help people who were depressed, who were helpless, who felt hopeless, who were alone, who felt like they had no one, exactly the way that I felt. And I could do that through music. At the time, I didn't know drums well. And so within a few months, I joined a band with this guy, with Cody, and changed my life. Completely changed my life. But I had to get to that absolute lowest point to get enough leverage to make that decision. There are so many options out there for guys and for men to make that change and help them through their trauma. And the problem isn't necessarily the lack of options. The problem is, one, the society stipulations on it, and two, that tends to outweigh, and that, like, making that step is not worth it. They don't have enough leverage to make it happen, to something to making this step and taking this trauma in order to talk to people just to get into the door. That's not worth it. So for me, what got me to that point was the suicide. That was my part of the story. Was I got to a point where I was literally within seconds away from committing suicide. Ended up Switchfoot, the band, and then Meant to Live was the song, which the chorus says, you were meant to live for so much more. And then the second song that came on was this one from Chris Tomlin, Christian worship artist. And it said, the name of the song was Made to Worship. And in that moment, I knew that I was made to help people who are helpless, to help people who are helpless, who are alone, who felt like no one else was there for them, just like the way I felt. And then I joined the band with you, Cody, and that was our mission, right? That was our mission, was show people who were alone.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, to show people who were alone and hopeless that there was hope and that someone cared. And that was the entire mission. And that's why I joined.
And we had people that actually... I had people come up to us after our shows talking about how some of our songs and message in and of itself help people with suicide, which is amazing.
Incredible.
And you didn't join that band with the idea of, oh, we're going to help people with, suicide and all that stuff, like avoiding it and all that.
That was exactly my intention.
That was your intention?
That was my intention. Crazy. It may not have been yours, but that was mine.
No, it's just amazing how that all really truly was the mission of that whole thing.
Mm-hmm. But like to answer the question of like, what do you do? To me, at least for me, it was waiting until it got bad enough that making that step was worth it.
So
that's not a good answer.
So what's your message to people right now that are contemplating suicide?
Contemplating suicide, I think, is something that was really helpful. I think getting to a place where you feel so alone, you feel so hopeless and helpless, you feel like there's no one there and there's no step forward. I think in my personal experience and people who I have talked with who have contemplated suicide and made it back, that was a turning point. If you make it through, it's one of the most powerful turning points in your life. It's incredibly dangerous. If you make it through, it's one of the most powerful.
So
I've never contemplated suicide, so I have nothing to say on it. I don't know. I'm saying call help.
Yeah, I'm not saying like.
No,
Call
I think
Gabe.
you're
Call Gabe. We'll give you his cell
Gabe.
phone number. That's what you should.
maybe. Are you saying like
I'm not saying people should.
no. Like,
Take that.
like no. I know what you're saying. I just want to like kind of
Try it.
think about it. Let's think about it for like so if I'm in that place, you're saying like take it seriously. Like you're like in your own awareness, your own consciousness, like you're thinking about taking your life. Contemplate that, like not doing it, but you're at this place.
Yeah.
You need help.
Yeah, exactly. Contemplate it. Like if that's where you're at, be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
Because if that's where you're at, be honest. To be totally real here on this episode, I don't know if I fully realized the implications of what I was contemplating until after. And I've asked that question of 1, 2, 3, 4 people in the last 3 months who had contemplated suicide. 4 friends of mine, they said the same thing. And so that's purely subjective, but realize the extent of what you're contemplating, the seriousness. And the second thing to say would be, when you want to make a change, the most difficult thing is to start. By far, the most difficult part is to take that first step.
And why though?
Why is that the most difficult?
Yeah. Is it that shame and that trauma that we talked about earlier?
I think that's
Or is
a
there an
good part
addiction?
of it. It can manifest itself in a lot of ways. I think the shame, guilt, fear, shame, guilt, and fear can manifest themselves in 1,000 different ways depending on the person. But I think it is a lot about just the unknown. Like if you end your life, there's a guarantee you know what's going to happen, at least in part. You know the pain you're experiencing is going to stop. If you don't, there's no end in sight as far as you know. As far as you know, there's no end in sight. And when you get to a point where you don't feel like you can take it anymore, one of the most important things to realize is that you have taken it this far, and it just takes one step forward. That's it. It just takes one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, what we're talking about right now is the catastrophe of all of the traumatic, all the trauma that has been suppressed leading up to, because that's what it is. Ultimately, suicide is just a result of somebody suppressing their trauma. Am I wrong? I mean, that's basically what it is.
I don't know, but I think
Unless you're going out and dying for something.
you're certainly not. You're certainly not in a place where you have a sense of hope, right? Like
no, but you
so.
that's dark. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, this is the darkness has been with you for a long time for you to get to that point, So let's kind of reverse engineer it then. So we're talking about the darkness to the point of like making that decision, the point that you actually got to where you were within minutes of potentially killing yourself. How do we avoid getting to that point?
And then can I follow up on that? So I think that's a great question, Cody, because like, how do you prevent it is the most important thing. But then if you can, that's a lot to process, but like if you're in that spot right now, like somebody hears this, right, and they're in that spot and they take your advice and they're like, okay, I know, like I picture somebody on the edge of a cliff. And what you're saying is like, wake up, see that you're at the edge of the cliff and like be in that moment, right? Pause, freeze,
And there's a very specific reason that I say that.
and then what, if you're that person, what's the next step? What do you do next after that? Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. And then, so I think, prevention, and then what's the next step? What's the next action step you can take after that moment?
So I want to start with the action step first, because there's a very specific reason I like the way you say that, wake up. That resonates. There's a very specific reason that's the advice that I would give. And it's because when you're at that place, I'm good, thanks. When you're at that place, what you've done to get there is you've avoided everything. You've avoided all of the pain. And in order to avoid the pain and stuff down all of the hurt, all of the shame, all of the guilt, all of the fear that you've experienced, what you've also done is stuffed out any chance of happiness, any chance of excitement. When you mute one emotion, you can't. How do I say this? You can't just mute one emotion. When you try to mute one, you end up muting all of them. You feel everything or don't feel anything. We've all experienced this at some point, right? Like I went through a breakup a couple years ago, and it was really hard, and I avoided feeling it for 6 months. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I am completely numb.
It's like
relationships.
I'm out.
Relationships. I think we can all relate on the relationships situation.
Yeah,
It's
right.
like
Yeah.
this level.
No, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, that'll bring you to suicide.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
but like especially when you're like exiting a relationship, if you try and avoid the negative feelings, what do you notice? You avoid all of the positive feelings in your life.
Yeah.
You can't just mute one. And in the attempt to mute one, you mute everything, which is by muting everything, you mute your hope to move forward, which in my experience was one of the ways I was able to go into that cycle. So this also ties into the prevention, is to face your fear. Is the one, like, look at the gravity of what you're about to do. Understand that the decision you're about to make has more weight than you're aware of at the moment. And two, you take a breath and say, if I were to face this for let's say 1 minute, what would happen? What's the worst thing that could happen if I felt that emotion for 1 minute? What's the worst that could happen?
Now, did you do this?
Sorry.
Did you do this alone?
Yeah.
Or did you do this with other? Because you're coming out now and talking to people about this.
Yeah.
Because you've overcome some severe trauma.
Yeah.
Did you do all that alone?
Yeah.
Because you're probably like, I mean, I don't know statistics here, but
probably
I imagine
rare.
that's
It's
like
probably
the
very
1%.
rare, yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't think
No,
it's common for people to
I
do
don't
this alone.
recommend. I don't
think I could do it alone.
Yeah, I don't recommend it.
So how do you, because you're kind of this hybrid 1%er guy who found value in your life to keep you going from making that horrific decision. And call it a godsend. I think it was, from a Christian's perspective, I think God sent you that song because that just rang true to you.
It rang so true.
And we can't just expect that to always be the case for everybody, right? I mean,
It's not. I mean, clearly, if you look at the numbers, it's not the case. It's like, it's dark.
Right.
The numbers are bad.
and especially men, because I mean, we're very passionate about men. And they're the ones who don't want to reach out and talk to people about this shit, So like, how do we, they should though.
Yeah.
Right.
I agree.
I think you
Absolutely
talked about contemplating suicide, but maybe would it make sense to, and I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing this out there, and like no agenda, like contemplating with somebody else or contemplating by yourself and then talk to somebody else, asking
I can tell you.
because we got even people that are military that come back, and these military people with astronomical PTSD, and these guys are just like straight up just want to end their lives. I mean, I've talked to so many men who have struggled with suicide just in the military. And that's just from being a part of the darkness of war, Like, so how would you do it? I mean, because I really don't think that you're a common statistic at all. Like,
To do it alone.
you overcame it alone. Like, that's crazy. I didn't know that you were suicidal until 10 years after knowing you,
Yeah.
which I'm so sorry that because you have this persona, this ability to just, Gabe is one of the most happy people I know. He's literally like externally, the outward,
Well, that's a coping mechanism, 100%.
Yeah.
right. And no one knew it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
No one had a clue.
It's both been incredibly helpful in my life because it's brought some incredible people in my life. People are attracted to that positivity, but ultimately bred out of a coping mechanism. And I've had to find that balance of like, okay, that's shit. I shouldn't be just being positive all the time. But also, how do you keep that positivity while in order to bring in positive people in your life? Weird balance.
There's a couple like different theories like to kind of like pause on that right there is that there's a theory called the polyvagal theory of like the nervous system. And like there are these different levels of neural shutdown. Yeah. And there's this higher level of and they've done a lot of thought to be like in different branches of the vagus nerve, which shuts off, which inhibits, and how that manifests in somebody's life. And they have, like the way I think of it is different levels. You know you're functioning well, like when you're social, you're positive, you're interested in things. And like then you have various levels of shutdown. You have like fight or flight. You have different levels. You have numbness, dissociative issues. Then you have these like deep levels of just like almost comatose, like your body's just completely shut down. And they've done a lot of thinking to be like, which I thought it's very helpful because you can literally know how your nervous system is functioning looking at those levels. But one of the adaptive responses is this idea of fawning, fight, flight, or fawn. And this idea of fawning is you take on a persona to the people around you that you are okay, and you're sending out a message, maybe on some level to hopefully get that back. You're almost mirroring maybe what you want to somebody to reach out to you, or but fawning and being a nice guy can be a trauma response. Mm-hmm. You know.
Yeah, in a lot of people I know that is
people pleasing. Yeah, things like that can be a response of like. Dealing with these profound neural states. Like sometimes it's better to pretend you're happy than to like deal with the real
but
issues.
It's so not.
Yeah. Oh, it's
Yeah.
I mean, dude, that's just like that's mental credit that you cannot pay back. Ultimately.
You never get back, right? Like
you never get back at all. I know it's not even a credit. You just lose it.
And I think a lot of men are at that stage too. They're fawning, and everybody thinks they're great. Everybody thinks they're doing great. Everybody, oh, he's a great guy, and it's you're putting off this persona that you are okay, probably because of these shame-based, like we talked about the double trauma, because you're like, if I can get like the first trauma is like okay, I don't have to deal with it. You're gonna have to deal with it eventually.
Well, and Matt has helped me tremendously. I mean, he talked a lot about the sympathetic nervous system, which I did not know anything about, but realized that I was pretty much living off of. Yeah. And so for me, and again, it's that whole fight or flight thinking. But for me, it's just I can be kind of more like a hypochondriac. I'm probably a 6 or 7 on the hypochondriac scale, out of 10. And for me, like. Realizing that there is a huge biological piece of this
absolutely.
That we're not actually it's it's mental, it's the trauma that happens in our life, but there's also just the simplicity of the biological stuff, how we treat ourselves, what we eat, how much we sleep, the drinking of water.
Absolutely
like you Gabe, you mentioned breathing. These
absolutely.
are all things I think that we could all work on in our lives better. That would probably shut down living off of the sympathetic nervous system, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and learning how to regulate the nervous system that's what therapy kind of does, doesn't it? Like dealing with core wounds, and these core wounds are something that traumatics that happened that's left this neural imprint. And I've read books on trauma. There's a great book called The Body Keeps Score, and it's just what trauma does to the body. And the book is it's incredible. They see brain scans of people before an accident and after an accident. They've seen brain scans of people who were in an accident, had good care at the time of the accident, and their brain didn't have these dramatic representations. The brain is obviously intensely biologic, and it's like trauma leaves an imprint on the brain. And that imprint, the funny thing about the human mind, as far as I'm not a neuroscientist, but we only have a couple different expressions, of the autonomic nervous system. We have relax, or some kind of fight or flight. We only have a couple different ways out of our situations. So for me, it's kind of, and when we talked a lot, about sympathetic nervous systems and being stuck in that place, you can only be there so long. It's like the snake in the room. Like you can only deal with that snake in the room so long. You become hyperfixated, obsessive. You can't break away from it. And I think that's what I don't know, but like that's what PTSD is on some level. You're fixated in a loop of. So I think for men, there's a lot of hope in the sense of like this isn't moral weakness. This is a biologic representation of something that's happened to you. It's like no different if you got I went to catch a ball and I smashed into a fence. I got 30 stitches in my mouth and knocked my teeth. I mean, it was a mess. But nobody looked at me and said, "Oh my God, you poor," like you're stupid for getting help. Nobody said to me, "Oh, you shouldn't go get your lips stitched up." But because that was a physical trauma, and nobody had that. But when it comes to mental stuff, like guys have this stigma that if you get help for those kind of things, you're somehow less of a man on some level.
Well, let's talk about. I mean, because so Matt, you've helped me a lot with this stuff. In our friendship for the decade or however long you and I have been friends, and one of the things that you've shared with me in your life is this concept of the. I mean, you had tinnitus.
Yeah.
Can you kind of share a little bit about that? I mean, that's like that plays into what you're.
That brought me to a very It's a long. It's deep. I went to some dark. Yeah, absolutely.
It manifests itself in so many different ways.
Well,
for every
one of the things that it was the best moment of my life, and it was the worst moment of life. It was a defining moment, and for me, I couldn't take my mind off it. I was literally this noise in my head. I was like split in half, right? So I had this on the one side of me, it's like I wanted to keep my life going, but the other side of me was, I've got this noise in my head, and it was. If I was born with it, I think I would have been like, whatever.
It's normal.
But this broke into my life in my late 30s, early 40s. And I loved silence. I used to love silence. I used to like and I couldn't sleep in silence anymore. So this profound sense of loss that I had lost a space where I could just relax. And so it was, it was dark. Long story short, in my darkest places, a couple of thoughts that helped me. There's a certain hubris that comes with darkness, depression. I say hubris because that helps me. I'm not judging anybody else. Hubris is pride on steroids. When you're deeply depressed, right? You think you know the answers. So you say things like, yeah, that's okay. You say things like, "There's no hope. There's no way I'm going to get better." But.
Just keep going.
I learned to say to myself, "You don't know the future." And I would say, if you knew the future, you wouldn't be here now. And it was irrefutable. So I was like, that's true. I wouldn't have this issue if I knew how to manage my emotions, my nervous system. So I don't know the future. So there is a possibility of hope. So I held on to that very strongly. Like there was a possibility that I could get better. That maybe go to what your point too is like if you're on the abyss and darkness is so all consuming, you forget that there's light. Mm-hmm. And there's a hubris, a sense of pride. Like, I know I'm not going to get better. I know I can't get better. I know I'm done. I know I'm doomed. I'm blah, blah, blah. Right. So, but what if that's not right? What if that's not true? So I learned to ask that question. That was one of the big things for me that helped a lot was me being able to reframe the emotional experience and say, you don't know the future. It sounds simple, but man, did that help me.
Now let me ask you this. So like Gabe, he overcame potential suicide on his own. Did you overcome this stuff on your own? No, hold on. You both are crazy researchers and readers, and you guys listen to all kinds of amazing people. That doesn't count. Okay. Like I'm just talking, I'm just talking about having a friend, having a person in your life, a counselor. It could be a pastor. It could be anybody. I don't care. All I'm saying is like, we all listen to all the best podcasts in the world, read all the great books.
Right.
Like,
So,
did you actually get help?
So for me, call it what you will. For me, it was a certain type of fate in the sense of I had done the reading, I had done research, I was that guy, right?
Right.
But tinnitus was unmanageable for me because it split my attention. I couldn't be with my kids without being like fixated on the noise. I couldn't sleep without being fixated on the noise. I couldn't be with my ex-wife now without being. I couldn't be anymore without this hatred of this noise because my brain had tagged it. So I remember starting to do some research and reading initially, and I read this guy, and he was like, this is another thought. And I read this book. It was really, really good. And he said, you need to get help. He said underneath tinnitus is usually a complex set of emotional issues, spiritual issues, life issues at play, especially if you go to an audiologist. My hearing was fine. So it wasn't a hearing issue. It was something else was at play. So to piggyback my situation, like you have hubris on the one side, but the opposite of hubris or pride is humility. So this guy said, you're going to need some radical humility if you want to get better. Wow. And there was this picture of my daughter. Oh, I don't even want to talk about it. It makes me cry. The picture was so profound. And I just was like, I would look at that picture and it kept me going because, you know, I was in a dark place. And so I couldn't give up because of my kids. And so, you know, I had to face that double trauma. Like, I'll never forget going to the psychiatrist for the first time. So I did get help. And it was the most redefining moment of my life because I needed help. I couldn't research it. I couldn't out-research it. I couldn't out-muscle it. I couldn't do anything. I had to get help. And so I'll never forget the humility it took to go get help. It was awful. Here I was, like 225, you know, lifting hundreds and hundreds of pounds, like had friends, loved ones, and, you know, had a decent life. And here I was. And so I had to confront the very, very deep pride issues to get help. Because I was sitting in this office. I remember for the first time looking around. And I mean, I'll never forget seeing it was an older guy and his wife, and he had some kind of like Parkinson's, and he was just shaking, and his wife was there. And I was like, so he's here because he can't stop shaking and he's lost his life. Essentially, the life he knew was gone. Wow. And I look over and I'd see some girl, young girl, and she was like, you know, cut marks on her arm, you know, with her parent. And so she's trying to kill herself, most likely. She's cutting, you know, yeah. And then how do I fit in here? Like, I've got a good life. I got a good job. I have great clients. How the fuck am I here? Yeah. So I had to confront that first trauma of like, I'm okay. I got this figured out. Like, no, you don't. So I did have to get help. And it crushed a lot of like, those stereotypical male kind of like, here's who you are. This facade, this persona of what it means to be a man. I had to like confront that perception, and I got better. And as soon as I got help, I continued to read and research, and in the research, I figured out how to take care of the tinnitus. And then I got help to deal with how do I deal with the tinnitus in the meantime? How do I work on habituation? How do I get my lifestyle? And in that process of getting well, it took a long time. Getting well is why I started writing. There was a young girl here in Lewiston who took her life. She was like 14 years old. And I remember, and I'd seen some dark stuff. I've been with some friends to like psych wards who were like suicidal, things like that. And I'd see all these teenagers. So I wasn't there for me, but I was there supporting somebody. And I would see these teenagers pouring in on these random nights, like 15 teenagers in the psych ward. Men, girls. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And at that point, I had gotten better. But I knew what it took. It took total confrontation with your persona. Yeah. It's ego death. But on the other side of ego death is like real life, right? Because the ego is just fake. So that's why I just started to write. And that became very profoundly therapeutic. And the writing itself is, it's a book I got about getting well. So this girl took her life, and it rattled me to the core. Because I know a lot of the things I did to get well were free and lifestyle based. And I'm like, this poor girl had, and the story with her, she had a psych appointment, a psych eval set up. And there's such a need for psychiatrists. You know, it was like 60 days or something like that. And then she just couldn't wait that time. And so she took her life in the interim. And I thought, what if there was something that could help her? That's why I wrote. And that's why I chose fiction and horror. That if there was something out there somebody could read that was entertaining, that had one thing, like what Switchfoot did to you, like what Chris Tomlin did for you.
But this is a serious problem in our world where there's a crazy suppression of the reality of darkness that's going on within people. I mean,
Yeah,
'cause you don't want to
yeah.
talk about it. People, like, and I speak out to the church too. Like, the church doesn't want to talk about this stuff.
No.
They don't want to talk about it. They're like, well, we avoid darkness. We take darkness, separate it from the church, remove it from the church. Don't talk about it. You know, and just forget church. Let's just forget
Yeah.
church for a second. Just in general, let's just not talk about it because it's bad television, bad whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like,
Yeah.
but this is what we need to talk about if we want people to survive. Like, if we want people not just to survive. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, that's why, like, I feel more comfortable going to a church with, not that I've been, gargoyles and spires and darkness. And the funny,
that sounds satanic.
it does.
The
And,
average
and,
church.
and here's the juxtaposition. When you go into those churches, what do you always see invariably? Painted glass. And it refracts the light. Purples and reds. And so this dark building, you go into these churches and they're just playing with light as you go in there and see painted, I'm not painted, but stained glass. And you see, so the imagery of those old medieval churches has a therapeutic effect. It would have been a,
Well, because there's something.
and I'm not,
going on.
look, and I'm not criticizing any architectural, I'm not qualified, but I do know this. I would have felt more at home in these type of buildings, in these, because they tell a story, they tell a message. Now I understand a classic Protestantism. What they're saying is this book is the light. I get that, but when you're struggling, you're going through trauma. Sometimes it's hard to listen to a sermon, but it's easy to see a demon, like look, as it's going to pounce on you. You'd be like, I relate. Then you go into the church, and the stained glass is like purple, and it's beautiful. It just
Well, you got one guy. So you got a guy who struggles with alcoholism or
Yeah,
sex
right.
addiction or drugs
Right.
or any of these things. Like, he goes to the church and he's like, I struggle with like so much shame in having to to say that to people. But the one person you're going to gravitate towards is the person who's the addict. You know, the other, like, that's
Right.
the people we gravitate towards. Now, if only there's a way to like not shame people.
So yeah, like I think it's a great point, because that's why I picked horror. So if you're an addict, who are you going to relate to more, a vampire or a contemporary modern
Definitely the vampire.
pastor? Right. You're going to hang out with
relate to?
you're going to hang with a vampire. If you're an addict.
Yeah. You're gonna hang with the
100%.
vampire. You're not gonna hang with the contemporary modern.
Right. So it's like, I'm not judging anybody, but like,
But you want to because you feel like it's the right thing to do.
if you're like struggling, I know just with my issues, it's therapeutic to go to a building. If you have demons, like, you know, their teeth are out, their nails are exposed, they're gonna pounce. It's that sense what Gabe was talking about. You're at the edge of the cliff. Something's,
It becomes real.
and it's like, I find that therapeutic, because it means your trauma is real. It's a artistic, architectural manifestation
You're acknowledging
of what
reality.
you feel inside.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, that's the problem. The church. I keep saying the church. Forget the church. I think people in general suppress reality within the heart. You know, whatever's going on within the heart, we want to suppress that reality.
Yeah.
Cover up that reality with something beautiful and something, those colors that you talk about. You know, that architectural color, that are beating through. And, it's just,
And I think it's fair to talk about the church. Like, I'm not afraid to go there, because
no,
like,
I'm not either.
No,
I'm just
I know.
saying,
I
like,
just,
in general, like, because I,
talked to
don't want
somebody-
to lose people being like, oh, the church. It's just like,
You're
no,
right.
it's
Well, I
beyond the church.
I talked to
How about
somebody-
politics and everything.
well, culture at large. But I talked to somebody.
Culture at large,
I talked to somebody the other day who was like, kind of suicidal, and she was like, she was talking to me, and she's like, just tell me what I need to do. Yeah. And she just can you hold me accountable? Make me accountable. And I was like, and I had just talked. It was kind of this random conversation, and I was like, you don't have. She just kept talking about behavior. And I said, did you grow up in a religious context? And she was like, yeah, my parents were very, very religious. And she said, I had to leave the church. And I said, what makes you think you have a behavioral problem? A problem that needs accountability, a problem that you need somebody to kind of like make sure you wake up on time, make sure you I said, what makes you think this is a behavioral problem, a moral problem? What if this isn't a moral problem at all? What if this is a nervous system problem? Same thing like you hurt your shoulder falling down. Well, we wouldn't say that's a spiritual problem. My shoulder hurts. You'd be like, oh, you need to pray more. you know? So, and this person was like, I think that was profoundly helpful to her. So I think the church can be moralistic. Now, the culture can be materialistic. Go buy something, right? Like you're in pain, you're suffering, right? Well, go buy a car because then you'll feel better. You know, you're struggling. Well, what you need is you need to go to Pornhub. Then you're going to feel better.
Right, but I mean, primarily, I think moralistic is more prominent than materialistic, because materialistic would just indicate like psychopaths.
Well, I think materialism is
like that's fixing the problem. But, like,
but I think I'm piggybacking on what you're saying. Like, it's not just the church's issue, but I think I can go Kanye West. I won't do that, but I want to go Kanye West. There is an intrinsic bias to keeping people unhappy in a capitalistic framework because you can sell them product.
Jeez, yeah.
So I want to you've mentioned something.
Wait, hold up. I gotta pee. You guys keep talking
Okay,
now.
Cool.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right.
My question was specifically for you. You mentioned something, and this was super related to my own personal experience. And I didn't catch the similarities until a few minutes after, and it processed and clicked. And I want to hear your thoughts on this. You had mentioned that there was, and I know you got emotional with this, so I apologize if this brings it
That's
up.
fine.
You mentioned that there was this image of your daughter, this photo. And that is what, correct me if I'm wrong, that is what gave you essentially the motivation, or the leverage is the word I was using, but the motivation to move forward and say, okay, I have to get this work done.
To confront I didn't know it was pride's a strong thing, but it was something that said I have to confront whatever's in front of me. Yeah, that picture was powerful.
So for me, what that was, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you see this distinction, let me know. If you don't, let me know. But what I see in your story is that doing it for yourself and doing it like, okay, I am going to rely because I have to, or because it's me, wasn't enough. And then you saw, oh, this is how it impacts someone that I love. For me, what that was like was me being like, okay, I'm going to do it all myself. And that brought me to a point of, thank you. That brought me to a point of suicide. And then it was like, okay, wait, the song came on. Oh, I could use this to help
Thanks, man.
others.
Appreciate it.
All of the sudden, something clicked. That song, I could use this to help other people who feel like this. I was able to, if we want to take a step back, I was able to reframe the meaning of all of my trauma moving forward. Instead of it being, woe is me, I'm a victim, how dare everything happen, why am I like this is terrible, to, oh my God, this allows me to move forward and make a difference. I can impact other people's lives. Am I correct in saying that?
I think absolutely, because I'm kind of into game theory right now.
Love it.
And I thought a lot about my struggle. And I thought this is my experience. But if you look at suicide in light of game theory, right? If you're playing a game, you can't win. You're playing a game, and not only you're losing, you're playing and losing and losing and losing. Eventually, you're going to be like, the first step is like, oh, try to get better. You practice, and you get worse. There's only, again, put that on a clock. It's only so long before anybody's going to play a game they suck at and they're losing at, they're being humiliated at. What's the next step? Is they're just going to unplug the machine.
Yeah, we're done.
And we would, if we saw somebody playing that, would say, that's a wise move.
Yeah.
Because you suck.
Yeah.
Right? So you're wasting your time. So I thought a lot about that. Like suicide in one sense is like, it's game theory. I'm going to unplug this machine because there's so much pain. There's so much humiliation. So when it comes to my own personal feeling, it'd be better not to feel the pain. That's kind of logical. It's kind of gamed out, right? But if you unplug your machine, what if you take out 5 other machines?
Exactly.
That picture of my daughter, I knew if things went sideways for me, they did enough. But if they went worse, I was going to take my trauma, something had to be done with my trauma, is the way I looked at it, or my experience. If things went sideways for me, that doesn't stop there. I take that and put it on the shoulders of my daughter.
Yeah.
And maybe her daughter, and maybe her daughter, and maybe her daughter.
There's studies to show that, yeah.
Doesn't stop. No. So it was like that picture. The picture was this beautiful picture of my daughter playing with I think it was Pip or Leo, and it was Madison, and it was such an innocent picture, and I was like, if I unplug my game, I unplug her game, and that innocence I will destroy. And I was like, can't do that.
Can't do that.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
Talk about, that was leverage. The biggest leverage was there. Yeah. It wasn't even my ex-wife at the time, because she's an adult and like whatever. She'll find somebody else, right? Like I'm not that special. So it was like.
But that plays a large part as the gift of our children, you know, because I have two daughters, you have two daughters. I know Gabe's on his way to having kids here in the next Imani, if you're listening to this, I'm really sorry.
Oh man.
No, but no, it's I think that is a massive part of the gifting that we get with our children. Is that's a huge reason to move on. I think there's a lot of people that are suicidal and they have kids. There's a lot of people that are wanting to just destroy their lives with all the different ways that they can, you know, that catastrophically destroy their lives. And it's just like, think of your children. Like, just stop for yourself for a second. Think of your children. Like,
and the idea is that you say, I'm going to rescue my children from this pain. But you don't. And that's the thing about trauma that's so powerful. It's like, what would it have meant to my daughter from her nervous system? Because look, what would have happened? Like, if it went sideways, like, there's no money going to come in for the family right off the bat. Okay, how do you deal with that? Like, wow.
Yeah.
So let's just say a random couple with two kids. Forget about my situation. Father takes his life. The mother, let's say she's working part-time. Her life has just changed, right? Let's say there's not good health insurance, life insurance. There's no money. What's she going to have to do? So she has to go to work. And the kids are grieving, and she's grieving. How's any of that going to work? You're just taking your trauma and you're just saying, I've unplugged my game, but you take yours.
Yeah.
Now you're the one who's going to have to deal with my unresolved. It's just passing it down.
There's actually this study that, and I think you're going to love this. There's this study. Have you heard of like how trauma can pass down from generation to generation? Not even talking about suicide here, but just general.
No, never read any studies about it.
I am so excited to go into this. So this blew my mind. I was reading this study on science and spirituality and connection, and they brought it up in reference to the Bible, where it says, "Oh, the sins of the father were passed down to the sons and generations." And I was like, "What the fuck does that mean?"
Yeah.
Like, I can't get my mind.
How does this
around
work?
that.
Right.
Exactly. So then I started doing some research, and I found this, and it completely changed my perspective. So they started this study with mice. They said, okay, we're going to take these two mice. We're going to take this female mice. We're going to breed this female mice with this male mouse. And this male mouse, before we breed them, what we're going to do is we're going to blow in this very distinct smoke of cedar, this cedar wood. And while we do it, what we're going to do is set up this like hat essentially around him and just start triggering his brain, sending these electro pulses into his brain, literally just traumatizing the mouse and associating with the cedar smell of wood. Okay. Then we're going to breed this mouse. The female, totally fine. Then we're going to say, okay, look at these kids. Now the kid, we're going to breed this kid who has no sense of cedar, has no trauma related to cedar wood, smoke, absolutely nothing. We're going to breed it with a completely other random mouse. Okay. Then we're going to have their kid. Now, we're now 2 generations down. And again, 2 generations separated from the trauma of electric shocks into the brain connected with cedar wood. Then we took this mouse 2 generations down and just puffed cedar wood in. And what happened? Wild change. Just started freaking out. So then they said, okay, behavioral change, sure. And they said they started blowing cedar wood into other mice. Nothing. They're like, okay, odd. Let's look at what's actually going down. in the nervous system, in the body, what's actually happening. What they found is that the metabolism was significantly slower, something like 40% slower. Their threshold for stress
That's crazy.
on like how much, the threshold. So what would cause them to reach a point of stress was significantly lower. How they would react, the hormone production when they were stressed was significantly higher. So it would take less to get them stressed. And then when they were stressed, it would go so much higher. So they're like, okay, this is wild. They marked that down to 7 generations. And they're like
7 generations.
7 generations. Then they're like, okay, that's mice though. Like how do we get the FDA to say like, yeah, let's do this for humans?
Right.
But then we had the Holocaust.
Wow. Unbelievable.
So what they did is they found the survivors of the Holocaust and said, okay, your parents, your grandparents went through this.
Wow.
Let's measure your metabolism. Let's measure your stress threshold. Let's measure your reaction to stress compared to the national average, and the exact same numbers showed up.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you're looking up the study right now.
Yeah, I am. So,
Yeah,
so
no,
here's what
ridiculous,
I'm like.
right?
No, it is ridiculous, and you know, taking it to a whole nother level. Like even addiction can apparently be passed. There's been studies about how
Yeah,
addiction
for
can
sure.
be passed
Yeah.
down. So I guess that kind of raises the question. So you know, passing something down to a general, like my daughter Everly, she looks very much like me. My daughter Ilya looks very much like my wife. All right, there's a physical, biological transformation there. Okay, that's happened from generation to the next.
right.
But when it comes to the brain,
Yeah, right. Huh.
I guess what we're talking about here is not just a mental estate, but a biological estate too.
Absolutely.
That's
And it's not a
actually-
behavioral or religious or
No, it's
right,
if
like-
you have an addiction to alcohol,
Right.
you probably are going. Well, I mean, we know that to be true. I mean,
Right.
that babies have been born with the
Right.
addictions
Right.
of drug addicts and alcoholics. But what about pornography, or what about levels of just anything,
Yeah.
anything mental that we would classify as mental, almost as if it's not biological. It's just this thing called mental. It's like the
Right,
iCloud. I guess us humans have this iCloud thing, No, but it's like those things are passed down from generation to generation. You see people. So, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Like, as far as
Well, I think it's pretty
Addiction.
clear. Like I think it's absolutely true that the biological realities are massive, huge.
That's why it's so important for us to be having these conversations.
Well, it's like
to
a
be able to
dopamine.
be able to help people work through their traumas now. If nothing else, if you're not able, like I wasn't able to work through my trauma for me. That was not enough motivation. We've all been there, right? The person who abused me mostly also abused people I loved and am very close to. It was when I realized they abused me, I was like, okay, whatever. When I realized they abused the people I was close to, like that's what I have never been so angry and so full of rage and hatred as then. Don't care what you've done to me. Like sometimes we need something else. If you're not helping yourself for yourself, help it for the people who are your next generations. Help it for the people around you, for your kids, for your family, for the other people that you may unplug if you unplug yourself.